Hi there, my name is Giles Crosse and I am ISEAL Associate Manager for Content Strategy, and I'm here today with Vidya Rangan, ISEAL Policy and Engagement Director, and we're talking about the EU Green Claims Directive and why credible claims and indeed truthful business are both so vitally important. I wonder if the first question that I'd like to touch on surrounds exactly what the Green Claims Directive itself is and what does ISEAL consider its key purpose to be. Be intrigued in your thoughts on this.
Thanks, Giles. The EU Green Claims Directive is the EU's effort to take action against greenwashing and protect consumers and the environment. It's a law which is part of the massive set of legislation that the EU is coming out with in line with the EU Green Deal. And essentially, the Green Claims Directive is trying to do three things. It is trying to make claims on environmental aspects of products reliable, comparable, and verifiable across the EU. In doing that, it's trying to protect consumers from greenwashing. But it also has this other important goal, which is to establish a level playing field when it comes to environmental performance of products. So, in a nutshell, the Green Claims Directive is the law that's going to set rules for how companies, schemes, and products within the EU can claim environmental impact or speak to particular environmental aspects that they deliver on.
Brilliant. Thanks, Vidya. What intrigues me about green claims to an extent is what does the sustainability world consider green claims to actually mean? I think within sustainability, we often have certain phrases that we understand clearly, but sometimes the terminology and the understanding of these terms can vary from businesses to policies or across the NGO sector or consumers. So I wonder if you have any thoughts on how to speak to exactly what we consider green claims to mean in the real world.
Sure. Green claims is essentially, I think, a catch all phrase to talk and refer to claims that one can consider to be sort of credible, right?
Mm,
So
mm,
um, I think for me, green claims is claims which are about environmental aspects of products, therefore the term green. But it does mean very different things to different stakeholders because the term claim is quite differently understood by different stakeholders as well.
yeah, yeah.
So if you're a business, a claim is something you're making both in order to try and either sell a product or differentiate a product in the marketplace, but also potentially talk about something that that is different, right, about that product. If you're a
Sure.
consumer, a claim is something that is speaking to you. You may be at the receiving end of information that defines the choices that you make, the purchasing and shopping choices that you make. And as an NGO, a claim is something that could be seen as information that is spurring certain stakeholders towards actions, but potentially also misinformation, which is where the entire greenwashing debate has settled on. So the word claim means different things to different people, but
Yeah.
for me, green claims is essentially claims or communications which are essentially talking about environmental aspects or goals or impacts that a business or a product is encompassing.
Fantastic. Thank you. I think a key phrase that came to mind there was greenwashing, but we'll come back to that later on in the conversation, probably quite frequently. So maybe we can look at how sustainability systems, businesses, and green claims are related to one another. Clearly, there's a lot of interplay going on here, and perhaps as importantly, what we might need to change or improve to drive better real world partnerships on these green claims as well. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Sustainability systems are essentially voluntary tools that have been supporting business to define and guide action on sustainability for several decades now. And as part of that, sustainability systems have uh, put processes in place that can support the businesses they work with make the right kinds of claims and credible claims. So, in some ways, claims making is quite integral to the way in which sustainability systems work with businesses.
Mm,
The
yeah.
most traditional example of this is environmental labeling schemes, although that's not the only example. So, in a labeling scheme, essentially a scheme that sets a voluntary framework and has certain parameters and frameworks for sustainability. If a certain
Yeah.
business adopts that, then there is an agreement between the system and the business that they could use a certain label that is owned by that scheme on their products. And we've
Yeah.
seen eco-labeled products on shelves for a very long time now. So that's one way in which claims making happens. But there's a lot of claims making that happens just in a more B2B sense between systems and businesses, which may not take the form of a label at all. So
Yeah.
you
Okay.
could have businesses putting products out on shelves where implicitly at the back end they are working with a sustainability system to drive certain impacts in their supply chains or in their
Yeah.
procurement, but that may not always take the form of a consumer facing label, right?
Yeah.
So
Okay.
it is important to recognize that the way sustainability systems work with businesses and how claims comes into that picture, a part of it is to do with labeling, which is the more discussed and obvious part because it is very consumer facing, it is very visible, but there's a
Yeah.
lot of back end work that also happens. And the best sustainability systems should be supporting their business clients to be making good, transparent, and well evidenced claims.
Fantastic. Is there anything to mention just on potential changes to drive partnerships on green claims more effectively, or just anything that you'd speak to about how partnership in that sense could be improved?
Definitely. I think one element of what makes claims good and trustworthy in the eye of the receiver, so the person who's reading the
Yeah.
claim,
Yeah.
is the fact that it's backed up, right? So it's the fact that there's proof, there's evidence behind it. And that's not just any evidence, that evidence has to be generated by a scheme or a system. And that's where this
Sure.
partnership can really start playing out. And that's where this partnership can make a real difference. Because if you are a business that is seeking to talk about what your product is doing or how it's different or what sustainability you are driving in your supply chain, if you are supported by a system that can help you gather that data, that can help provide that evidence for you, that can help
Hmm.
assure that this is actually the case, whatever you're reading in a claim is actually the case on the ground. That's a sort of partnership that's needed to actually back
Yeah.
claims
Yeah.
up. So that's one example of real world partnerships between schemes and businesses when it comes to claims. There's other examples. So, labeling, for example, would involve a very clear and transparent mechanism between the scheme and the business and ensuring that there are rules of engagement or claims management systems that ensure that
Yeah. Yeah.
when the label can be used in what way and so on, so that it is credible and it does not mislead consumers.
Is there anything that you'd say further about why credibility is so crucial to green claims?
Absolutely. I think if we take a step back, we're talking now about a
Yeah. Sure.
specific
Sure.
policy that, a specific, that's being rolled out in a specific jurisdiction. If we take a step back and focus on the outcome that we're interested in here, the outcome we're interested in is that claims making in the business space happens in a manner where it empowers consumers to make sound and confident purchasing choices,
Yeah.
exercise that
Yeah.
active choice, and also that in doing so, it incentivizes businesses that are investing in more sustainable options to talk confidently about that in a well evidenced way. And the
Hmm.
outcome we're interested in is that good, strong, credible claims making incentivizes more sustainable reaction by businesses.
Yeah.
From that perspective, if that's the outcome we're interested in, credibility has to be at the heart of understanding why it's essential to good claims making. We're talking about transparency. So things like speaking the full truth, putting information
Mm.
out there,
Yeah.
making
Sure.
sure that there is a source of more detail, that whatever you're saying is backed up. You're talking about truthfulness, not hiding information, ensuring that you're talking about the most relevant aspects of that product or that environmental goal. You're talking about robustness so that the claim is not misleading, it's accurate. um, and all of this essentially coming down to what how that system is functioning. That system could be within a business, that system could be within a scheme. If you have a scheme partnering with the business, then that makes the entire setup all that stronger. But essentially, the outcome we're interested in, the best way of driving that outcome, both for consumers and for businesses, is making sure that the principles of working and how business operates is underpinned by credibility and those
Hmm.
credible practices.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. I think that speaks really clearly to that point, and I think it's a really important one, especially to us here at ISEAL. It would be interesting to hear if you had any thoughts on the real world impact.
I'll probably illustrate that point with an example. So,
Cool. Yeah.
Um, ICL's work on credible claims goes back to 2015, probably a bit before that as well, when we published our good practice guide on sustainability claims. And since then, we've been a consistent voice in both talking about the need for claims to be more credible and producing more
Yeah.
specific guidance, both for sustainability schemes as well as for companies on what good claims making looks like. And last year, we produced a guidance that was focused on helping companies and schemes make credible claims on living wages. Now,
Okay.
living wages is a topic that's receiving a lot of attention. It has seen a very high amount of corporate commitment being made towards both closing living wage gaps, but also enhancing decent work for workers within supply chains. Now, when you are in a space where there is a lot of sustainability action taking place, there is this desire for those taking that action to talk about it. But if that's not
Yeah.
underpinned by a sense of what good communications and claims look like, you can easily start eroding trust.
Mm,
Trust from donors, trust from consumers, trust from those who are watching the space very closely. And the
yeah.
aim of our living wage claims guidance was to ensure that at this point in time where we actually want more commitments and more action from businesses on low wages and supply chains, it happens in a way whereby it incentivizes more investment, the right kind of
Hmm.
investment, and
Yeah. Yeah.
holds to account those who are not walking the talk. And in order to do that, you need a good sense of what good looks like. And so,
Hmm.
in terms of the real world impact, when you have good claims making happen, it can have multiple benefits, both to consumers, but also to funders, investors, and businesses, and the support structure that is needed to scale up sustainability action.
Yeah, sure. So there's something you've mentioned there interests me actually, and it's not on the agenda that we'd specifically set out to discuss, but just more generally in terms of sustainability and environmental action, something I've observed a lot down the years has been the balance between, I guess, between incentivization and between punitive measures. And it might be interesting while we're discussing this general space just to hear if you have much of an opinion on how it's important to balance up punitive measures or I guess penalties with the incentivization approach in these kind of spaces.
That's such an interesting question, Giles. I think when it comes to claims or any other aspect of sustainability, the complementarity between voluntary and mandatory measures can probably most easily be understood as the carrot stick sort of
Yeah, that's right.
analogy, right? So, mandatory measures are the stick. They set down the minimum requirements that a certain government expects from businesses. But by definition, because you are setting a minimum requirement, there are limits to how far you can take that
Of
because you
course,
are
yeah.
interested in compliance from the entire cross section of an industry or a certain kind of economic
Yeah,
actor.
yeah.
Voluntary measures by definition don't have compliance as their goal, but what they have as their goal is what is needed to drive long-term sustainability impact. And that's why traditionally voluntary frameworks and measures have always set the bar higher, than what minimum
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
requirements have been in legal terms. And on the question of punitive damages, this is a very interesting space in claims right now. There is more legal action that is being taken on misleading claims right now across the world than there has ever been in the past.
Sure, yeah.
And this means that both consumers are sitting up and regulators and lawmakers are responding to the scale of the greenwashing problem. I was just reading, I think one of the biggest lawsuits in the space has been the one against Deutsche Bank's asset management firm,
Uh-huh.
where the
Yeah,
United
yeah.
States Securities and Exchange Commission slapped a huge fine. I think it goes to the tune of
Yeah, I'm
$90
with you.
million, essentially holding the firm to account for making inaccurate statements regarding its ESG investing practices and assets. And there's been other cases where large firms, very public brands, have been taken to court in light of what consumers have been seeing as either incomplete or inaccurate claims. I think all this
Yeah.
just to say that there's a signal that's being sent to the market that while we're supportive of sustainability action, it has to happen in a manner that is credible and does not erode consumer trust. And I think that market signal is coming from very many jurisdictions around the world, not just the EU, which is what we're talking about today.
Yeah, great, fantastic, thank you. Yeah, it's always a space which has fascinated me. Just as you mentioned, the carrot and stick approach. There's always a really intriguing balance to be found there, I think. So we've covered those points. I think I won't come back to key stakeholders and improvements on green claims. I think we've probably covered that as well. Could you speak a little to why ISEAL is so well placed to comment on green claims, and perhaps as importantly, maybe assist with policy integration and transposition of credibility and green claims into EU nation state green claims law? Do you think, Vidya?
Sure. ICL is a recognized and trusted thought leader on sustainability and has been working on the topic of sustainable claims for over 10 years. Our work in this space has included guiding the action of voluntary schemes who work across a range of sectors and contexts, but also um, guidance that is specifically targeting companies and how to support companies make better claims. One of
Yeah.
the things that sets ICL's work apart is that a lot of our guidance that's been produced on claims over the last 10 years has included various forms of public consultation in it, which means we can be confident that efforts have been put in to invite views from a very wide range of stakeholders. And the what comes out through the guidance is then common needs and common requirements, but also setting that um, setting setting the ground for what is achievable and what does good look like when it comes to claims making.
Yeah,
So
sure.
I think our guidance on claims are public goods, and these have been used by schemes and companies for a long time now in the real world in a range of supply chains to actually improve claims making. I think what the other dimension of what makes ICL's work interesting is we also recognize where policy is coming from. So we recognize why
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
EU is coming up with the Green Claims Directive. We are invested in support the broader outcome that these policies are seeking to achieve. And that understanding of policy directives and um, goals in addition to the thought leadership we have from a credible practice standpoint
Mm,
makes us very well placed to actually understand what's at stake here and what does good look like in practice. And what's
sure.
interesting about the work that ICL has done is not only that we have defined these principles, produced this guidance, looked at just what robust systems and practices look like, but also that we have been in conversation with a wide range of schemes and companies who've had implementation challenges on all these
Mm,
good practices. So it's
yeah.
one thing to have a good practice noted down in theory, it's quite another to be putting it into practice in the real world. And what makes it interesting is even as a law like the Green Claims Directive comes into force, there are
Yeah.
going to be situations and scenarios where lawmakers, implementers, enforcers are going to run into concerns or issues about what implementation looks like. And I
Yeah.
think that's where this experience is really going to matter.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think from my perspective, that also touches on the localism approach because we have all the overarching laws across various parts of the world and various jurisdictions. But, these always have to work down to the kind of minutiae and down in local places. So I think there's always an interesting conversation to be had there that I'm sure we'll return to in the future, just in terms of getting this stuff working on the ground in local parts of the world as well. I'm always really interested in opportunities as well, actually, when it comes to governments or corporate leaders in terms of green claims and credibility. And so often this can feel like, to an extent, it's hard work. So I wonder if you might be able to speak a little bit to what the really, really big, exciting opportunities are in this space, Video.
I think the opportunity, if we get this right, is quite massive. Consumers exercising their choice with information and confidence, and the market rewarding brands and products. And
Yeah.
as I was saying earlier, we want it is important and it is good news that governments and regulators are stepping up to take action on greenwashing and put measures in place to ensure that it's good claims that actually make it to the marketplace.
Yeah.
From a government standpoint, if you are a government that has set green goals for itself, it is important that you are creating the right market environment, the right enabling system to ensure that that is the sort of behavior that manifests right in the marketplace. So, from
Yeah.
a government standpoint, I think these laws are both important to send the right message to the market to ensure that consumers' rights are protected, and we are inviting consumers to get more conscious about their choices, right? And that then means that those choices drive a sort of consumption that is more sustainable. And that's the real world impact that we're interested in, that business is getting more sustainable in what it's producing and consumers are getting more sustainable in what they're consuming. From a corporate leader standpoint, I
Yeah.
think the
Yeah.
point about a level playing field is really important. There have been many businesses, leaders in sustainability who have made investments, innovations, done the hard work to actually look at what needs to change in their business models to make things more sustainable. And the
Yeah.
last thing
Yeah.
you want is, something like greenwashing or misleading claims come in and erode the
I'm
um, the
with you.
faith and the incentive to make that sort of investment. Because if you can't separate the wheat from the chaff when it comes to who's actually making a difference, then who's going to be incentivized to actually make
Yeah.
more of that investment? And that's going to kill innovation in sustainability essentially. So I think we're talking about a very technical topic, claims, but I think it's fundamentally linked to market mechanisms, to creating the right
Yeah.
incentives,
Yeah.
and to behavioral change, where all stakeholders have a role to play. And just to say that I think one of the most exciting aspects about the regulatory and policy space on claims is the role that
Yeah.
financial actors and regulators are starting to play. So we're seeing a range of sustainability disclosure regulation come through
Yep.
from around the world,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that also going to require more information, more disclosure, more transparency from companies about claims that they make on their ESG products and activities. So that combination of that, along with initiatives like empowering consumers and green claims, which come from a consumer standpoint, that combination can be quite powerful.
Brilliant. Thanks. Yeah, I think that's absolutely on the nail. I think those points are so important. I think it's fascinating what I think you were alluding to as well, to an extent that some of the greenwashing that happens, it's almost as though that can stick to the entire sector to an extent, regardless of exactly how individual businesses are acting in these spaces. We hadn't previously planned to discuss this, but I wonder if you had any thoughts on that in terms of how greenwashing and perhaps some of the negativity that can exist in these spaces can tend to stick to the whole sector, and maybe ways that transparency or even credibility can help with that.
Yeah, I mean, what you don't want is that the entire sustainability space is, clouded with skepticism.
Yeah,
That's just
exactly.
going to kill, I think, both uh, the incentive to focus on these real world
Yeah,
impacts.
yeah.
And like I said, active choice by businesses and consumers to be doing things differently. And that skepticism, I think, if we are fair to ourselves today, is a problem. You have a lot,
Sure.
there's been a lot of overcrowding of labels in the market. I was reading research that was put out by the European Commission, potentially as input into the Green Claims Directive, where they're saying the large majority of claims that are made are not evidence. The large majority of eco
Yeah.
labels do not come with more information. And consumers are both confused and frustrated because, and compare that with other research that increasingly says that consumers are getting more conscious.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
when you put both these trends together, then you just see what a massive problem greenwashing is, because it's both taking away the opportunity, but also taking away the incentive. I think where
Absolutely.
credibility matters is it sits at the heart of both these trends, because as we were saying earlier, it's going to come down to what choices a business makes or what choices a sustainability scheme makes in terms of how is it going to talk about its work. Now,
Mm.
even when you have laws like the Green Claims Directive come in, and this is not the first sort of legal instrument in the world against greenwashing. There have been
Yeah, sure,
plenty
sure.
predecessors to the Green Claims Directive, which goes to say that there's going to be, actors who do this right, and there's going to be people who don't do this right,
Of
always.
course, yeah.
And I think that's where credibility matters, because if the message we're taking is that it doesn't matter if it's coming from a legal instrument or from a voluntary framework, what's really important is for a business or a company or a brand to sit up and start asking themselves questions of, why am I saying what I'm saying? Do I have the data to back it up? Is this the
Hmm.
truth that I'm
Yeah.
putting out there? Am I being transparent about what I'm doing? That's going to be the differentiator, I think, going forward, because legal instruments have those who will comply with it and those who may not comply with it. But what we want is that shift in thinking about the way we talk about sustainability action. And for me, I think credibility sits at the heart of that.
Yeah, great, fantastic, thank you. Maybe if we move the conversation on a little bit, could you talk to me a little bit about the smart mix video and perhaps how that can enable more credible claims and impacts and potentially hasten that work as well?
I think the smart mix where a company is both doing what's required by the law, so mandatory measures being in place, but also going
Yeah,
that
yeah.
step further to really work on itself or its schemes or its systems um, with a long-term view of sustainability impact is going to make a difference, because that company has a head start in complying with
Mm,
whatever is going to come down the line in terms of
yeah,
mandatory
yeah.
measures. So if you think, 10 or 15 years back, companies that were already thinking about good claims making or that were already working with sustainability systems that had good claims management processes in place, I'm sure have a head start when it comes to being compliant with something like the Green Claims Directive. And by head start, I mean not only in terms of the systems, the
Hmm.
procedures, and
Yeah,
practices,
yeah.
but also in terms of the thinking. Because when it comes to sustainability change and action, it takes a very long time for that mind shift to take place, within
Yeah, sure.
companies and supply chains. So there's a head start on both those fronts, that you've taken your company on a journey and that you are
Hmm.
speaking and communicating more credibility, and that you've put systems, processes, and practices in place sooner. And what that means is compliance with regulations like the Green Claims Directive could
Yeah,
either
yeah.
mean less investment at this stage, so less costly, but also that transition is made faster, which then means that you can go out there and talk more credibly about what you're doing, potentially faster than others who've not
Mm,
made these
mm.
investments. So that's one dimension of the smart mix, just giving
Okay.
people that advantage and that edge, and ensuring that you're guided not only by what's legally required, but also guided by what's going to create change in the long term.
Yeah, there's always a really intriguing balance there, I think, between those elements. Maybe we could also speak a little bit to the ISEAL codes specifically and how you feel that impacts in the green claims space. And I guess just maybe for those who may not be quite so familiar with these themes, to look at the interplay between the credibility principles, green claims, and the impact of the ISEAL code as well. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
I think the ICO code of good practice for sustainability systems now has a mandatory section in it, which is
Hmm.
on claims. Previously, the guidance on claims was more optional for ICL code compliant members to implement. And the inclusion of this section on claims in the new code is also testament to what we're seeing as being this really vital role that clear, good green claims can play in the space, and that compliance with ICL's code should be a mechanism through which governments and business should have that additional level of trust in those schemes, which therefore implement these good practice at a systemic level.
Fantastic. Maybe I'll move our conversation on a little bit and just look at differentiation. Obviously, a credible green claim and a less credible competing claim. There's kind of a conflict there potentially. And then there's also differentiation between corporates which use credible and less credible claims, and the whole balance here of differentiation in these spaces and these claims, and how to understand that perhaps from an outside perspective, and to ensure that the best real world changes are happening simultaneously feels to me pretty complex actually. So I wonder if you can speak a little bit to that video, just how you feel that sense of things is moving forward, and just perhaps what some of the, I guess, some of the opportunities but also the challenges with differentiation are.
In terms of what a credible green claim looks like, ISEAL's put down 5 principles of what good
Hmm.
claims
Yeah.
should be. And I think they encompass that vision of what a good claim is quite well. So we say that claims should be clear, accurate, and relevant, and built on a robust and transparent system. And I think that's a
Hmm.
very good starting point to
Yeah.
differentiate a
Yeah.
good claim from one that's not good, a credible claim from one that's less credible. Going a step further, I think there are many factors that differentiate claims that you can trust from claims which are less trustworthy. So
Hmm.
things like the quality of evidence that you provide to back up a claim, the transparency and detail of information you provide around how that claim is being made, the context you're setting for what that claim is trying to speak to. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
for example, if you are making a claim on one stage of that product's production cycle,
Mm.
what else does the consumer need to know about what else is happening in the production cycle of
Yeah.
that product?
Yeah. I'm with
Or
you.
if you're making a claim about a product that's coming from a certain origin, what else do consumers need to know about the context of that product or the people who grow them? So, a good claim is one that both has the right content in it, but also then
Mm. Yeah.
engenders trust, right? It needs to
Yeah.
uh, both be clear and good, but also give that sense of being trustworthy. And I think any one of us, I mean, when you read a claim and one that you trust, there are certain things that appeal to you, and you know quite clearly that that's a dodgy claim and that's not something I'm going to trust. So this is quite
Mm.
intuitive. I don't think it's entirely only scientific, but it's quite intuitive to consumers
Yeah. Yeah.
on what they trust and what they don't.
Would you have anything to mention on working in partnership and green claims and hastening their progress video? I guess we could be talking about any potential elements of partnership here between businesses and sustainability systems, or just the general stakeholders that are involved in hastening this work globally.
I think what's interesting when you come to the question of partnership in
Mm.
making good
Yeah.
claims is that there are good reasons why businesses should both be putting processes in place themselves for making more credible claims, but also that when a business partners with a sustainability scheme or an NGO or any other
Mm.
partner
Yeah.
who help
Yeah.
implement sustainability in its supply chain, that they also have the right systems in place for talking clearly and credibly
Hmm.
about the
Yeah.
change that's being driven.
Yeah.
So, just to say that the onus is not just on the scheme that's working with the business, but on the business that's working with the scheme as well. I think beyond that, what makes sustainability systems, I think, more credible partners when it comes to claims making is that they themselves are multi stakeholder. The best sustainability systems are
Mm.
multi stakeholder and have taken the trouble to seek views from a range of stakeholders, including consumers and
Yeah. Yeah.
producers and
Sure.
policymakers and researchers who work in this field. And that, I think, is a useful advantage for businesses to have. So you want to be working with a partner who's not just bringing
Hmm.
one point of view, but actually a sort of 360-degree view on what
Yeah.
good claims is, or for that matter, on any other topic. So I do think there are interesting ways in which the partnership between schemes and businesses can play out in claims making, and that combination could just ensure better and more trustworthy claims going into the market.
Yeah. Great. Fantastic. Thank you. It seems to me that greenwashing has it's been prevalent over decades of environmental action, in my experience anyway. So it's a kind of a controversial question, but I wonder if you might have a viewpoint on why green claims in particular should make any particular difference to this video.
There are two ways of looking at the problem.
Yeah.
One is to say that it is a problem that has existed for a long period of time, and it has reached a scale
Sure.
where governments are now turning around and saying, this is really damaging, this needs to be curbed, and that's why the law has come in. So that's sort of law and legal instruments sort of being a response to what is just a global trend. But the other way of looking at it is to see the opportunity, which is that
hmm Yeah. Yeah.
if we are convinced that there are good actions that can be taken to make supply chains more sustainable, to drive better livelihoods, to empower workers or deepen human rights impacts or address the climate crisis, if there is good sustainability action that can be taken,
hmm
then it is a good thing for people to be talking about that kind of action. And the last thing you want is for something like greenwashing to damage the opportunity of something that's good and something that has the
Yeah.
potential to
Yeah.
be scaled up to drive change. And like I said, what you don't want is that the action in this space is, clouded by this by skepticism. So for me, I think why we should be interested in green claims now is because we potentially have the momentum, the investment, the finances driven by the urgency of what good sustainability action can look like. And we need to create the right environment for making sure both businesses, entrepreneurs, producers, suppliers can talk about that in a way that incentivizes more such action. And greenwashing would be counter to that vision.
Thank you so much for listening. I really hope you enjoyed our podcast on green claims, and keep in mind that we're releasing new podcasts as part of our wider thought leadership regularly here at ISEAL, so do check back in soon for more. If you have any questions for me at all, then don't hesitate to email giles@isealalliance.org, or if you'd like to learn more about ISEAL and our work on credibility or indeed green claims, then just visit www.iseal.org.